Hey everyone, Muckluck Longname here, and Guild Wars 2 just hosted a guild chat livestream where they demonstrated the full kits for the Specter Thief, the Untamed Ranger, and the Mechanist Engineer. The purpose of this video is to TLDR the 103-minute broadcast they did into a much smaller package. Let's get started. First up was the Specter Thief. Their goal for this class was simply a thief support, and then they fleshed everything else out from there. The Specter's trade-off is that it has less initiative than a standard thief. Steel has been replaced with Siphon. It gives you 25 Shadow Force, and this works like a Necromancer's Death Shroud, and applies conditions. If it is used on an ally, it instead gives the ally barrier and forms a connection with them if you are in Shadow Shroud. Does not generate Shadow Force when targeting a friendly, but it will have a much shorter cooldown when used on a friendly. Shadow Shroud decays over time and also decays when hit, just like a Necromancer's. All offensive skills in Shadow Shroud also do positive things to the linked ally if you have one. Spending initiative generates Shadow Force as well. Shadow Shroud has 5 new skills. Incoming damage is drained from the Shroud, just like with a Necro. 1. Haunt Shot. Damage and torments target foes, gives might to you, does might and healing to your tethered ally if you have one. The 2 skill is Grasping Shadows. Range damage, torment, and cripple, condition cleanse and heal self, and condi cleanse on your tethered target. The 3 skill is Dawn's Repose. It is a mobility dash skill, fear at the ending location, and barrier per target struck to you and your tether. 4 is Eternal Night. Damage, chill, weakness, and poison in front of you, healing to you and your tether. It is an AoE stun after a short channel. You and your tether gain stability. Stability gains bonus duration per enemy hit, heals the tether based on the number of enemies hit. Scepter skills. The 1 is damage on enemy plus torment, or barrier on allies when you target an ally directly. 2 is Shadow Sap. Weaken plus damage on enemies and gain might on hit, or barrier an ally and give might on hit. It is very easy to keep 25 might stacks on a single target when aiming at them. 3, with a dagger offhand, is Twilight Combo. It is chill, poison, and torment, or barrier, swiftness, and healing on an ally. With pistol offhand, it becomes Measured Shot. You shadow step backwards from an enemy and fire a shot that damages and immobilizes, or you shadow step towards an ally and heal them. This skill will combo into Endless Night, which damages, slows, and torments an enemy, or barriers, regens, and quicknesses an ally. This is a beam, so it will affect targets between you and your target as well. The stealth version of the Scepter is Shadow Squall. It will do damage, poison, and might gain, or if you use it on an ally, and yes, it still breaks out of stealth when you use it on an ally, it will do a ton of healing. Their new unique skills is that they get wells. All wells are shadow steps and then they drop the well, so every one of them is a movement skill. The Well of Gloom heals allies and cripples enemies per pulse. The Well of Bounty gives boons to allies that they don't already have. If they have all boons, it will stack might. It will do 5 pulses and has a 20-second cooldown. Because of the nature of this skill, I am very curious if this will be the new boon thief. It is possible that if you have a group that is missing one crucial boon, such as quickness or alacrity, a thief specialized in Well of Bounty with some concentration gear might be able to come in and fill any missing spot. We'll have to see during the beta test. Well of Tears is very simple. It is AoE power damage pulses. Well of Silence is a daze pulse. Foes that were attempting to use skills when it dazed them will get chill, weakness, slow, or cripple, whatever they don't already have. 5 pulses. Well of Sorrow does 5 condition pulses. It will do poison, bleeding, or torment, prioritizing what you don't already have, and will stack torment if you have them all. The elite skill is Shadowfall, seen in the trailer. Drops a well that will pull in enemies like Zarya from Overwatch, increasing in intensity with each hit. In conclusion, Boon Thief is back and better than ever. Traits. The first passive skill is Siphon and was improperly named. CMC yelled at Carl during the broadcast for calling this skill Specter. The first skill unlocks the Scepter. Steel becomes Siphon and your initiative is reduced. Gain access to Shadow Force through spending initiative and gains access to Shadow Shroud. As mentioned before, Shadow Shroud, when you go into it, it will go down over time and also go down when you get hit, just like Death Shroud. The second passive is Dark Century. You will apply a buff called Rot Rottweiler Venom to any allies that you grant barrier to, and outgoing healing to allies is increased. Rottweiler Venom makes that ally apply a torment stack on their next attack. What this means is if you devote all your time to doing beneficial boons to an ally instead of auto-attacking an enemy, you will still be giving damage to your party through that ally. The third passive is Panaku's Ambition. You gain a barrier when you strike foes with a stealth attack. When you apply stealth to allies, you also grant them a barrier. It is important to note that it is only when they first enter stealth. If you use Shadow Refuge to pull stealth on them multiple times, it is only when first entering stealth that they will get the large barrier from this. In the first tree, we have Second Opinion. A portion of condition damage is converted into healing power. Gain healing power, which is increased when wielding a scepter. They mention that some of these traits would work very well with the Plague Doctor set. The second skill in the first column is Shallow Grave. If the ally tethered by your Shadow Shroud takes a lethal blow, it will consume your shroud and prevent their death and heal them. Or, if you take a lethal blow, you will enter Shadow Shroud instead if you are above the threshold. This is very similar to a matching skill that the Necromancer has, except theirs is of course self-only. The third choice in the first column is Consume Shadows. Leaving Shadow Shroud will consume all remaining Shadow Force, healing nearby allies based on energy consumed. Allies that are fully healed receive the rest of the value as barrier. This is a massive all-in heal. With a full bar with whatever gear CMC was using during this example, he went into Shroud and immediately dropped out of it next to a low health target golem and healed it for over 20k. Keep in mind, this is an all-in move. It's kind of like a druid going into astral form and just dumping the whole thing at the same time. Second column first skill is Larcerous Torment. Torment you inflict is increased. Gain Shadow Force when you torment a foe. The second option is Amplified Siphoning. You gain increased Shadow Force when you hit a foe with Siphon. Grant increased barrier when you target an ally. So this is just a flat buff to your F1. The final option in the second column is Traversing Dark. Heal allies in the area around you when you Shadow Step. Keep in mind that every single well is a Shadow Step. Gain Shadow Force for each ally in the radius. Wells grant Alacrity on their initial impact. It is possible with enough concentration gear that a Specter specializing in this might be able to fill in if you cannot find an Alacrigade or an Alacrity Mirage. In the Grandmaster column, our first choice is Strength of Shadows. Gain expertise based on a percentage of your vitality. Incoming damage from enemies is reduced based on the number of conditions they have. Rottweiler Venom, that is the buff you put on your ally that makes them apply torment for you, inflicts torment for a longer duration, and that duration increase is currently 50%. The second choice is Hungering Darkness. While in Shroud, transfer conditions from your tethered ally and cleanse conditions from yourself. Each condition removed in this fashion heals a percentage of your base health and grants your tethered ally barrier. This option is obviously massive support, but only for a single target. I'm reminded of main tank healers from other games. The final option is Shadow Step. Siphon now grants you barrier when you target enemies, and it revives allies when targeting them. Shadow Stepping breaks your barrier and grants it to nearby allies. That means that you'll be able to use your F1 on downstate allies to do a large chunk of the revive. Note it is 33%. I don't think it is going to revive them all by itself, but it could save a life. Next up was the Untamed Ranger. It was announced that the Ranger would get 4 new pets in End of Dragons. The Phoenix, which was the only one that they showed a visual for, a Wallow, a White Tiger, and a baby Siege Turtle. Wouldn't you know it, my 9-year-old was correct. We are getting a tiny Blastoise. Original name, Do Not Steal. The F5 skill will swap the Unleash mode between you and your pet. While it is on your pet, it will change the F1 through F3. While on you, it changes hammer skills 2 through 5. While on either of you, many different traits will kick into effect in the Untamed trait lines. This will not change any weapon skills for any weapons other than the hammer at this time. However, again, even if you're not using the hammer, the traits will still influence you accordingly. We will be getting more manual pet control. They showed that all pet skills can now be keybound and specifically mentioned tail swipe enjoyers. The F1, F2, and F3 each correspond to another pet ability. One thing I am not clear on at this time is whether that is going to be for all Rangers post-patch or just the Untamed Rangers. I suppose we'll find out on Tuesday? Unleashed pet skills. All of the unleashed pet skills do bonus effects when hitting CC'd targets. The F1 is Venomous Outburst. The pet will shadow step to the target and do do AoE poison and vulnerability if they are CC. I am curious if this skill will scale with your condition damage since it is coming from your pet, if you choose to build Condi. I'm leaning toward thinking that no, it won't, but I'm looking forward to testing it. The fact that the pet will Shadow Step with a 10-second cooldown, at least in the PvE game mode as they demonstrated it, is huge for Conquest PvP, especially when trying to keep up with moving targets. There are many pets in Conquest that just are constantly running after the targets and never actually getting any attacks off. The F2 skill when the pet is unleashed is Rending Vines. It is an AoE boon rip around the pet. It will slow targets that are already crowd controlled. The F3 skill is Enveloping Haze. It is a projectile blocking shield, pulses damage, and chills disabled foes. Will emit from you if the pet is dead. This is a poison field. Hammer skills. Cooldown between Unleashed Hammer and Basic Hammer is shared. You can't just use one, then swap and use the other of the same thing. The 1 skill, it's bonk. It just goes bonk, bonk, bonk. The 2 skill is Wild Swing. In its basic mode, it does damage and cripples. In its unleashed mode, it does not cripple, but does far more damage. And if the target is disabled in any way, it does even more on top of that. The 3 skill is Overbearing Smash. It does a daze, and if the first daze lands, it does a follow-up attack where it attempts to do a second daze. The first one happens very quickly. The 4 skill is Savage Shockwave. It emits 3 pulses of different sizes. First small, then medium, then large, and they each emit a different condition. Immobilize, then weakness, then vulnerability, respectively. If you use this in unleashed mode, it will do more damage per condition that the target is under, and more damage again if the foe is disabled. The 5 skill is simply Thump, which is a throwback to the Bunny Thumper build from Guild Wars 1. It is a 2-second AoE knockdown and blast finisher at super close range. The obvious combo intended here is to use the 5 to knock people down and then go into your other skills, which all do much more damage if you are unleashed. Something to point out here is that you can't access your pet's normal skills while it is unleashed. So it is almost like your pet now has a weapon swap. When you are unleashed, your pet will have its normal skills, but you now have more control over them. When you move unleashed to your pet, it will get its unleashed skills while its normal skills are recharging. The new skill set that the Ranger gets are cantrips. The first one is a healing skill called Perilous Gift. When you cast this, you cannot die for 3 seconds, and you also cannot swap pets. When the cantrip ends, you drain health from your pet based on a percentage of its current health and your missing health. The next skill is Exploding Spores, which was the one that we saw in the trailer. It creates a ring of spores around yourself that explode after a short duration. If an enemy is near the dead center and hit by all spores, they will be hit with a knockdown. Any enemies hit by any of the spores are hit with cripple. The next skill is Mutate Conditions. They finally realized that without the Wilderness Survival trait line, Rangers do not have any Condi Cleanse in any of their utilities except for one signet that is bugged. So they added another one called Mutate Conditions. It is a cantrip that converts all conditions on you into vulnerability. So it does give you a full clean sweep, but if you had a lot of them on you, you'll have a lot of vuln, but it might save your life. The next skill shown was Unnatural Transversal. They said we hadn't give Shadow Step to enough classes, so decided to give it to you. It'll teleport you to your target, which makes nearby enemies vulnerable. If the enemy was successfully hit by this, the skill's cooldown is drastically reduced from 40 seconds down to 20. They said that this was similar to other skills currently in other classes' toolkits, such as Ride the Lightning, that benefit you for going in. The next skill shown, which is the final utility, was Nature's Binding. It surrounds nearby foes with a cage of nature they cannot escape. They said that this was modeled similarly to the Dragon Hunter's longbow that puts down the baby gates around enemies that they can't get out of without stability. The elite skill is Forest Fortification. You surround yourself with elements of nature, gaining defensive boons and damage reduction. Striking an enemy while this fortification is active reduces the cooldown of this ability. It starts off with a 90-second cooldown and gives you resistance, resolution, and stability, 10 stacks, and also gives you a buff that cannot be removed by pesky necromancers called Forest Fortification that reduces incoming damage by 50%. Any enemies that you hit while the 10-second long buff is active will reduce the cooldown of this ultimate. Then he showed an example where he started hitting a whole lot of golems with his AoE abilities and was able to get the cooldown of the skill to completely recharge before it had even worn off. Now that is an unrealistic expectation expectation. You're not going to have that opportunity very often unless you're in the middle of a minion mancer horde or something like that, but it was still pretty cool to see. Going into the traits, the first one is Unleash Power. It simply gives you access to cantrips and the Unleash mode. While your pet is unleashed, its skills are replaced with larger AoE skills, and of course your hammer skills are replaced, just the 2 through 5, when you are unleashed. The second passive is Natural Fortitude, gives you a flat plus 240 to Vitality. The third skill is Vow of the Untamed. Your outgoing and incoming damage are increased while you are unleashed. Your outgoing and incoming damage are decreased while your pet is unleashed. So this is basically having you swap from offense to defense. In the first column, the first trait line is Debilitating Blows. Disabling a foe applies conditions to that foe based on your current state. So if you are unleashed, it will apply vulnerability stacks. If your pet is unleashed, it will apply weakness. The second choice is Cleansing Unleash. Whenever you or your pet swap Unleash, it will cleanse a condition. The third choice in the first column is Blinding Outburst. Venomous Outburst, which was the unleashed pet F1, will apply blindness in addition to its other effects. The second column first choice was Enhancing Impact. Disabling a foe grants you boons based on your current state. If you're unleashed, quickness. If your pet's unleashed, stability. Second column second choice is Bolstering Unleash. Gain boons when you or your pet unleash based on state. If it's you, it's might. If it's the pet, it's protection. Second column final choice is Corrupting Vines. Rending Vines converts boons into conditions instead of removing them. So the F2 skill on the pet, instead of just removing 3 boons, it will corrupt 3 boons. The Grandmaster trait's first choice is Fervent Force. Disabling a foe reduces the cooldown of all your equipped skills. So every time you land a CC on the enemy, all your skills cooldowns will be reduced by 4 seconds. The second choice is Restorative Strikes. A percentage of the strike damage you deal heals you, basically giving you 10% life stealing. The final option is Ferocious Symbiosis. You and your pet grant each other increased damage and movement speed when striking enemies. It starts off with 3% damage and 5% movement speed, but stacks up to 5 times for a total of 15% bonus damage and 25% movement speed. Whenever it triggers, it will refresh all stacks. 5-second duration. Finally, we come to the Mechanist. The trade-off for this class is a big one. You do not have your tool belt. When you use F4, you will summon your mech. It comes crashing down and CCs an area if it hits anything. Once the mech is summoned, its control bar will replace your F1 through F4 keys, similar to a Ranger's pet interface. You can name your mech. Additionally, at this time, the mech has a break bar. The mech has many channeled skills, and they didn't want it to be too easy to interrupt those skills without even trying to. However, if someone does break the mech's break bar, it is hit with a staggering 5-second long stun. Additionally, if the mech dies, it is on a very long cooldown. The one example they showed during the show was 100 seconds, so it will be very bad if this thing dies. The basic skills on the mech will change based on your trait choices in the Mechanist trait tree. The F1, F2, and F3 will correspond each to one of the trait columns. If you're running the trait lines across the top, the F1 is Rolling Smash. The mech will slam at the target with both cutters, inflicting severe bleeding to enemies in the area. The F2 option is Discharge Array. Your pet will cycle energy into the mech's armor to turn it into a lightning rod, and Jade Energy will strike nearby foes and inflict conditions on them, specifically Confusion and Slow for 5 hits. The F3, if you're taking all the choices along the top row, is Jade Mortar, which launches a powerful mortar attack at the target that includes Daze and Burning. If you take the bottom row, your Golem trades his swords in for a pair of blasters. F1 becomes Spark Revolver, firing a rapid volley of Jade Energy bolts from both arms, which pierces through all enemies. The F2 becomes Core Reactor Shot. You charge up, then release a powerful ball of Jade Energy at your target that explodes on contact. This is just flat damage and a launch. The F3 is Sky Circus. Your mech will jet up into the air and fire a missile downward at foes in an arc before it crashes down and does additional damage to anything directly underfoot. If you are running the second row of traits, the Golem will trade in his blasters and swords for a pair of Jade Knuckles. The F1 skill becomes Explosive Knuckle. Order your mech to dash at a target, punching them with explosive force that weakens enemies near the point of impact. The F2 becomes Crisis Zone. Your mech shrugs off several conditions from itself and grants boons to nearby allies, including Aegis, Regen Protection, and Alacrity. Now, this is a very small amount of Alacrity versus its cooldown, so this alone would not keep up Alacrity on a full party, but maybe with a few other things. The F3 would become Barrier Burst. The robot will begin channeling and pulse a barrier and boons to all nearby allies, including Might, Fury, and Vigor. It will do 5 pulses. It will be doing pure support in this mode, no damage. The next thing shown was the Mace skills. The Mace is main hand, which means you could use it with a condition damage offhand pistol or with a shield. The one skill does a chain where it just does a power hit, then a second hit with confusion, then a third hit with confusion, and also gives you, your mech, and allies near you barrier. At this point, I began thinking that I would love to try Plague Doctor's set on this with all of these conditions and ways of generating barrier. We'll see how that goes. The 2 skill is Energizing Slam. It is a movement skill. You leap forward and smash the ground, giving vulnerability to foes and vigor to allies. The 3 skill is Rocket Fist Prototype. It launches a fist that explodes on the first target hit, damaging and stunning nearby enemies. This inflicts the stun, damage, and burning. Next up, they revealed that the Engineer is getting access to signets. First up, the healing option is the Rectifier Signet. It constantly heals you and your mech every second, or you can activate it to do a large heal for you and your mech. Next up was the Barrier Signet. The passive is that incoming strike and condition damage is reduced by 10%. The active is you can create a projectile blocking dome around yourself. You and allies inside the dome gain barrier every second. If your mech is active, the dome will be centered on the mech and it will be larger. The next utility option is the Force Signet, which gives a flat increase to power. The active option, it will knock foes away from yourself and away from your mech. This is also a stun break. A stun break that cripples and knocks away foes is pretty nice. As long as the cooldown isn't too bad in PvP, this might be a very solid option. The next utility option is the Shift Signet. This gives a passive 25% increase to movement speed for you and your pet, and the active is that you and your pet will shadow step to the target location. The next skill shown was Superconducting Signet, which gives a passive increase to condition damage. The active effect generates a damaging field around you that applies conditions to nearby foes. If your mech is active, the field will instead radiate from and follow the mech. The conditions include vulnerability and confusion and flat damage. This is also a lightning combo field while in effect. The elite skill is Overclock Signet. The passive will reduce the recharge of other signets by 20%. The active will order your mech to fire its ultimate weapon, the Jade Buster Cannon. If your mech is not alive, instead your mech is summoned even if it is on cooldown. He then began showing the trait lines. The first passive is actually a really big deal. In addition to giving you the mech and taking away your tool belt skills, it will give your mech 25% of your stats. So if you stack condition damage, it will gain condition damage. If you stack power, it will gain power, so on and so forth. The second passive is Rocket Punch. New combat subroutines enable your mech to use Rocket Punch in combat. It will gain a greater percentage of your own toughness and vitality, roughly 50%. The Rocket Punch itself has a 25-second cooldown, does damage, and has a daze. The third passive is Energy Siphoning. It will gain automatic use of the Jade Siphon skill in combat, and additionally, it will gain 100% of your toughness and vitality stats. The Jade Siphon skill is a 15-second cooldown, does damage, applies weakness, and applies might. In the first column, our first option was Rolling Smash, provided by Mech Arm's single-edge cutters. Unlocks the Mech Command skill Rolling Smash, your mech's attacks will apply bleeding. This effect may only affect a given target once per 1 second. The Rolling Smash gives you the F1 skill, which was covered earlier. It's important to note here that essentially this whole row seems related to condition damage. The second skill is Mech Frame Conductive Alloys. It will unlock the Mech Command skill Discharge Array that was listed earlier, and the mech will gain a greater percentage of your condition damage and expertise, namely 100%. Third column, first skill is Jade Dynamo, which gives the pet the Jade Mortar skill shown earlier, and the mech's attack skills have a chance to cause explosions. Your mech will inherit all on-hit bonuses from the Explosions Specializations trait line. He then showed a few examples of this in action, but this opens a lot of possibilities for you to double dip. For example, you could get explosions, you and the pet can both use it. The second row starts off with high impact drivers, which gives the pet the explosive knuckle skill shown earlier. Your mech's attacks will now generate might for allies within a radius. This effect may only occur once per interval. That's 1 might per 1 second on up to 5 targets. Second column, second row is Mech Frame Channeling Conduits. Unlocks the Mech Command Skill Crisis Zone shown earlier. When you or your mech apply Barrier, you will also grant Alacrity to the affected target. The mech gains a greater percentage of your concentration and healing power stats. So far, we've seen that Barrier can be provided by the mech skill where it channels and pulses it regularly, as well as with some skills from the mace. The Grandmaster trait for the second row is Barrier Burst, which pulses a barrier and boon to all nearby allies. That was the skill shown earlier. While in combat, your mech will automatically grant a small barrier each interval to nearby allies. That interval is 3 seconds. It is a very small barrier, but remember, it can provide alacrity every time it provides barriers. So this is yet another source of alacrity. It seems like whether you choose to support or DPS, if you take these traits, you could have a literal alacrity butt. Final row, first column, Mech Arms Jade Cannons. Melee attacks will become ranged. Unlocks the Mech Command skill, Spark Revolver. Your mech's attacks will apply vulnerability. This effect may only affect a given target once per interval. Once again, the interval is 1 second. So the pet alone does not look like it would be able to keep up 25 stacks, but it can contribute. Second row, second column, Variable Mass Distributor. Unlocks the Mech Command Skill Core Reactor Shot shown earlier, and the mech will gain a greater percentage of your own power, precision, and ferocity stats. Power inherited goes up to 50%, same with precision and ferocity. Grandmaster trait for this row is the Mech Core J Drive. Gains access to the Mech Command skill Sky Circus, shown earlier. While dismissed or away for repairs, your mech supports you with occasional aerial bombardment. Signet skills will gain improved passive effects by 20% and continue to grant their passive bonuses while recharging. The Sky Bombardment looks like a giant laser coming down from the sky as if you had Tony Stark's own personal satellite, but again, only happens when your pet is not summoned. That concludes the TLDR of the showcase for the Specter, Untamed, and the Mechanist. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button to help us out with the YouTube algorithm, comment if you have any input I missed from the broadcast, and subscribe for more similar content. See you in the beta test.